So hello everyone. Thank you for joining the privacy talk. I'm so glad to invite Mr. Hank from US. So he's doing a remarkable research in the AI space. I'm happy to share his current activity and his research field. So Mr. Hank, so thank you for joining today's interview.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to introduce a bit of his profile. Hank's research lies at the intersection of human-computer interaction, usable privacy and security, and a human-centered AI. His research helps practitioners design and build privacy-preserving AI products. He also studies end-user privacy needs in computer AI, such as online behavioral advertising and ChatGPT. He's currently a PhD student in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, advised by Dr. Saubik Das and Dr. Jolly Fortitude. So again, Mr. Hank, thank you for joining today.
Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah. And at the first agenda, I'd like to explore your history, and you do work in the very impressive actions, and I'm very study about your research paper. That was a very interesting. Could you tell us why did you start the research, your interest?
Yeah, totally. So I guess I could provide two different type of reasoning. One is I would say it's more micro level. One is more like the macro level, right? So the micro level is I sort of like start my research journey as I see myself as a human computer interaction researcher, where I start my doing research in the undergrad. So like something that get into my interest when I start doing research is something interesting relationship between computer and human. So something I did before has actually nothing to do with privacy. I specifically study how people use their mobile devices, specifically how we could create a notification system that could actually be helpful for the user. You could even argue that it's actually on the opposite side of privacy. So when I applied to grad school back in 2020, I sort of get the chance to like pivot into different direction into my research, right? So that's also the time when I got introduced with the topic of usable privacy security, in a way that we brought human factors or concept about like human-centered design into the space of security and privacy. So that's how I got introduced to space. So the micro level reasoning here is that during the time I just like want to try something new, right? So that's in some ways like the main reason why I choose this direction and work with my advisor. But the macro level of that reasoning behind why I choose this path in terms of privacy specific in AI is that there is sort of a time when the conversation around responsible AI, which means that how we could create AI technologies more socially responsible, start to get really popular, at least in the Western context, right? And obviously privacy is something that always brought up. But something we found here is that a lot of time when people talked about privacy in AI or machine learning, a lot of times things pop up as differential privacy or federated learning, and there are super useful tools for sure. Or people will talk about how we could better collect user data. That's to say, but AI, I feel like the AI's changes or impacts to privacy could be beyond that, right? For example, as we now see that there are more AI capability infused technology being created, like facial recognition technology, surveillance technology, in a way that, for sure that we have to care about the collections of data, but how the design of this AI capability infused technology being, impacted individuals or society as a whole has seems to be less focused, at least when I was, start my PhD journey. So I feel like, the macro level here is that I want to engage with the conversation about how we could actually build AI system more responsibly. And I feel like privacy actually had a really interesting angle to actually engage with this conversation meaningfully.
Yeah, thank you for sharing us. That's been a very important in the privacy space at this moment. And you are now joining institute at Carnegie Mellon University and research in a human-computer interaction, which is the very interesting topics for us. So could you share about your research work and the university and what the vision that you are embracing right now?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So as I briefly mentioned, now I sort of like focus on my research around like privacy and AI, right? There's like also two angles how I approach this normally. The first one is actually from the practitioner perspective, which means that who actually use AI to build system, right? So they are who actually kind of introduce this AI technology to the real world and interact and that the lay people or normal users use those technologies. So a lot of work in the early stage of my PhD had to really try to build the foundation of this work, right? Essentially, we try to answer how does AI change privacy, if at all, right? And how does this practitioner who actually use AI to build system, so like, do they have awareness of this AI risk or how capable, or do they have any kind of support in doing so, right? And two of the key insights that we had so far is that one, AI indeed change about privacy. We could definitely talk more later on. And second insight here is that practitioner actually need more AI specific privacy guidance and support in order to actually do better work in their products. So this is like sort of like the foundation we had laid for this type of this kind of research. And what I'm currently working on specifically is I try to use this foundation knowledge that we learned from actually talking to practitioner and actually doing analysis on what's actually happening in this real world by analyzing the AI incident database of in terms of that how this AI system have been deployed to the real world and actually causing real world harms, right? So laying down from this knowledge, we're trying to build tools that they could actually help practitioner to address, identify privacy harms potentially in their AI products they aim to build or are actually building. So this is one aspect I sort of how I study AI privacy from the practitioner perspective. And I also did some research that studied more from the end user perspective, right? Obviously, there are tons of that consumer facing and products out there. One of the study I did before is try to understand the privacy within the context of online behavioral advertising or short for OBA. So, this is like the fancier word for that, basically any kind of mostly ads that you could actually see on either social media website or when you're browsing on the internet, right? So those type of ads that actually in some way know some of your personal information and they serve for personalized ads for you. So I study when and how people will want to know more how this advertisement potentially know their information and serve really customized ad for you, right? So when do they want to know more in terms of what type of information they know? Why do they know it, right? And another project I did, so like in the space as well, is looking into what we call large language model based conversational agents, for example, ChatGPT. So we try to understand, users' disclosure behavior in terms of whether they will share some personal information when they are using ChatGPT, for example. How do they navigate the risk and the, features that they want to gain from the ChatGPT and their mental model of how ChatGPT use your data. So, in the space of that, how end user interact with those consumer AI products. So yeah, there's like two aspects. One is like practitioner facing and one is like end user facing. But right now I would say it's like more focusing, leaning more toward practitioner facing research.
Yeah, that's very amazing. The we can touch on this research part is later, and I'm happy to like read up your paper. Then be helpful as the practitioners should be like taking a reference from the output. That was been very good. So as we move to the next topics, we always wonders how AI will change our privacy concepts. You quoted the some of the article, just like the big player, interesting player, like the creative AI or this kind of the new startup is the changing of the traditional concept of the privacy. So could you tell us how has the AI changed the privacy?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is basically what I talk to other my colleagues in a day-to-day basis. So yeah, really happy to talk more about privacy and AI. So I guess I could start this sort of like dialogue in a more, in some way that how people normally talk about AI these days, right? So obviously there are more and more technology that are actually utilizing AI to deploy the system or actually build new features. And for example, we use facial recognition to authenticate the phone, or we use like large language model to summarize documents, write articles, or we use like diffusion-based algorithm to create images and art, and they're all great, right? But there are also examples that we found in the real world that how these AI technology actually could introduce additional harm to user. For example, for facial recognition, you could easily imagine that there's like third party could get access to the capability that if they have your image of your photo, right? They basically know who you are, right? Or for large language model, there's always the risk in terms of how do they train these models? Do they actually got user consent when they're training those like really personal information of others? It's like a really unknown question, right? Or for distribution-based algorithm, there's like really well-known, you know, incidents out there, is like in terms of how deep fake basically ruin the whole web society or environment and all that, right? So yeah, there's always like incidents that we observe how these AI systems could actually change about privacy, but in a way that when we really want to boil down in terms of so how does AI change about privacy is it's actually a really hard question, right? So like there's a tons of like privacy risks already out there before modern advances in AI, right? So how does actually AI play a role in it? So obviously there's a hype of AI, that also make this conversation a little bit harder because there's always a hype about what AI can and cannot do, which make the conversation really tricky in terms of that. We could always think about the Black Mirror version of AI that could basically ruin the whole humans' privacy. So I think something is clear is that the modern advances in AI definitely change the capability of what computer could do, right? That's for sure. But what is clearly unclear is how does these changes or advances in terms of capability, or even the requirement in order to actually unlock those capability, change about privacy? That is actually the part that's actually unclear, right? So what's the delta here when when we introduce AI into the system? So what we do is we try to synthesize our analysis in real world cases rather than hypothetical. So we make a decision of looking into the cases that has already been out there. So one of the sources that we rooted our analysis is AI incident database, which is actually public and it's open source and it's actually collective actions. It's called AIAIC. So this is in this incident database, which you can imagine that a lot of like activism or journalism, whenever they spot any type of AI incidents that cause any type of harm, they will put those incidents into a shared document, basically a shared spreadsheet, and then so like using as a collective databases. And there are also like structured editors who actually sort these incidents and remove ones that maybe is not relevant. But long story short, these are a bunch of different incidents that in some way AI cause some type of harms, either privacy or sometimes transparency or fairness type of things, right? So what we did is we went through those incidents manually and pull out those that are privacy relevant. That's the first thing, right? So we want to base our analysis based on a real world incidents, which is actually happening in the real world already. And then we compare, or in some way, we root analysis with a well-known privacy taxonomy that Salas, a really famous professor in the US, proposed back in 2006. We use that as a baseline to compare what is different in terms of privacy before and after the modern advances in AI, right? So if you recall back in 2006, I mean, maybe AI is a thing, but it's definitely not that popular, or it's definitely not as popular as we're talking about right now, right? So a lot of privacy risks that we were talking about back in 2006 was not in some way not that poisoned by AI, right? So we use that as a baseline to compare what's different before and after privacy risk. So very briefly, we identified 12 type of privacy risk that AI either exacerbate or create. So what do we mean by exacerbate and create is whether AI in some way fundamentally change about a privacy risk that we found in the incidents. If that's the case, we say that maybe AI create a new type of privacy risk that we haven't seen before. or whether AI exacerbate the privacy risk that we already knew about, but in terms of increasing the scale or intensity, right? So that could be the cases where AI exacerbated known risks that we already know about. Or otherwise, AI could also sometimes doesn't really change about privacy at all, right? That's also the case. But long story short, what we found is that AI does not always lead to new or exacerbate privacy risk, but often does, right? Specifically, put a number here. Over 90% of the incidents that I would look into that we end up analyzing in the incident database actually involve situation where AI exacerbate or create a privacy risk. I'm not. I definitely don't have time to go through each individual incidents, but we actually put those incidents into a website at aiprivacytaxonomy.com. Encourage all folks to actually check it out. So I guess I could actually provide two example here. One could sort of demonstrate what do we mean by AI exacerbate privacy risk, and one is the created new ones example. So what do we mean by exacerbate? So one example here is surveillance, right? So surveillance obviously is something that we already know even before modern advances AI, right? When we talked about technology that constantly listening to or recording or like basically like recording people's individual activities that we say that, oh, this is actually surveillance issues. So what AI changed about surveillance issue is that it gave sort of like the promise of with AI, we as long as you had enough data, you could actually train really effective model. So that's sort of like the mindset of that. Yeah, regardless what we're doing, as long as we're using AI, we need more data. We just collect more data with a goal of that, let's say, deploy or build more effective model, right? Which is problematic. Which is actually really pretty problematic because we actually see a lot of AI systems that actually collect more data than they actually need to, just because there's a promise of that AI could easily sit through this data and make inferences, make reasoning about it very easily. So there's like one example that surveillance has been there already, but AI kind of exacerbate in terms of their skill intensity, right? And another an example of like how AI create new types of privacy risk could be phrenology and physiognomy. So physiognomy is pseudoscience that people have, being sort of like purports that one could understand one's personality or mental states only based on their physical appearance, like your face or body, right? And what we found is AI indeed being used in this way of that, there are attempts for example, try to predict whether a person is a gay or straight or whether they are a criminal simply based on their face. So besides the really problematic use of AI, of course, in this case, but there is also a risk of that, potentially users or people's really sensitive information is actually being inferred or, potentially being shared by AI systems. So yeah, just like the two example in terms of what we do mean by AI exacerbate and create privacy risk. But as I mentioned, there's actually more that we actually cover either in the paper and also in the website. But as a starting point, I actually encourage you to check out the website to learn more about it.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. There is a very few resources that speaking about the history of the AI and privacy. That your
Mm.
research is very helpful to reach it out the how this transition is coming in this space. And please check it out. His great remarkable work. So as a next topic, so you got a very interesting research with more than 30 interviewees about the like how they making a practices about the privacy in the space. So could you share about the overview of the research and then share about the any of the output that you received the feedback from the interviewees so far?
Yeah, sure. So the prior project I was talking about in some way try to answer does AI change about privacy? And the short answer is probably yes. AI in the change about privacy, right? In different ways. Um, and another question that we're sort of really also interesting as well is so given that AI indeed change about privacy, how does those folks, specifically practitioners who are using AI to build system, in some way approach privacy in their product, right? In their AI product specifically, right? So Specifically, we talked to 35 industry practitioners who actually work in the industry settings, ranging from startup company to like a large cooperation. And the only requirement of, in terms of our recruitment of doing the interview is that they had to be participate or have been in participating in the development of AI products or products that involve AI as a component, a crucial design components, right? So specifically, we asked them, how do you define privacy? How do you address privacy? How do you approach privacy? How do you talk about privacy in your product team? And also importantly, whether there are any type of tools that you would use when you do this type of privacy work, right? So, sort of like the really crispy one-line summary of the work is that privacy practitioners show limited privacy awareness in some way. And also they face more inhibitors than the motivators to go beyond the minimum requirements of what AI privacy means to their work, as well as they have really few tools that and resources to provide AI specific guidance when they actually want to do privacy work. And I could unfold a little bit here, right? So when I say they have limited awareness, it means that like in some way they do have some awareness that privacy is important, but what does that really mean in the context of AI is really unclear sometimes for them, right? For example, a lot of folks actually use large language model in their products, but few or even none of them actually talked about memorization issues in the large language model, which is actually a really well-known issues, right? So to provide some context, memorization issue in the large language model is given the particular prompt, you could actually try to retrieve information that the model is being trained on and reveal that to you, right? So that could be problematic when, for example, some real world large language model systems is actually trained on, let's say, the personal information of their users. And that could be a cases where the other user could use particular prompt to actually get some really personal information of the other user, right? You can imagine that that could be problematic in many cases. So that's like one example what we mean by they overall they have limited awareness in terms of those like AI specific privacy risk. And when I refer it as, we found practitioners having more inhibitors than motivators to do privacy work, what we mean by is that there's a bunch of obstacles they have to really go through if they really want to do privacy work, right? For example, there's like example when practitioners talk about the issue of power that actually make them to do less privacy work. You can imagine that, maybe they care about privacy, but maybe the higher management or the manager doesn't really care about it, right? So there could be a tension there, right? Or there could be an opportunity cost, which is actually a really well-known issues in the privacy security community as well. Like we want to do more privacy work, but when in some way it trade off with other things that we could maybe contribute to the product. But the some of the participants actually told us that they care about privacy work, but they're not going to be promoted because of they doing more privacy work, right? They're being evaluated in terms of how many codes they write, how many features they actually got delivered, and sometimes privacy work sort of like pushed a little bit back in terms of these product centric agenda. So there are many other examples as well that we also covered in the paper, which is, I think is pretty interesting in terms of to try to get a sense of are the current challenges for practitioner to try to do more privacy work essentially. And the final piece of that is I talked about there are a few tools that could actually help them to do more privacy work, right? So probably not surprising. A lot of time when they say, hey, do you have any type of, background information, background knowledge or tools that actually help you to do privacy in your day-to-day work in the product teams? A lot of time they actually refer to the privacy training that the company offered to them, the ones that, for example, they got during the onboarding session, the work onboarding session. But obviously, a lot of comments that or the critiques they had to those type of approaches is that those type of privacy training is normally pretty general, and it's really hard for them to actually try to apply the knowledge they got from that into their day-to-day work, right? So essentially, it just sort of like going back to practitioner themselves, like if privacy is important, you have to find a way to figure that out, right? Another thing they also frequently imagine, so like the overarching thing here is that they talk quite a lot about compliance, so like the main motivators of why they care about privacy in the first place. A lot of time they actually say, oh, because GDPR actually asks us to so I comply with this in order to actually sell product to EU, for example. So compliance is definitely a really important thing, but we also found that it could in some way just like set a tone in terms of, hey, this is the bare minimum that you had to achieve. Anything beyond that, may or may not you have to really care about it. So it's also a really interesting tension that we always, probably really folks are really familiar in the privacy security literature is that at the end of the day, maybe like legal compliance, like the final result that we have to rely on. But what we found here is that they also sort of like limits what the practitioner may want to actually do more, or so like push back a little bit more in terms of what they could actually do more in their actual works. So yeah, so this sort of like work in some way also like just give us a sort of like the overarching thing here is that we know that AI changed about privacy, but another thing that if we look into the practitioner side, it seems that there's no enough support from the practitioner end to actually care more about privacy specific for AI.
Yeah, that's a brilliant. Thank you for telling us. That's been very helpful to understanding of the overview of the privacy. In addition that you mentioned a bit about the regulation parts, let's becoming an AI regulation in some parts of the regulators, especially for the EU, has been started. And also in the US part is also like the government providing of the guidelines or any frameworks the companies or public institution has to comply with the privacy risk. As for your research, that's been a very interesting that you try to taxonomize of the AI's privacy risks. So could you share about how we can do the taxonomize of the AIs in the privacy risks from your research?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually, we definitely see our taxonomy as a starting point, right? We see that as an ongoing conversation with the community, essentially, in a way that we're not saying that, hey, this is all the privacy risks that will be introduced by AI. As the advances of AI keep going on, so do the privacy risks, right? Might create new ones that we had never seen before, right? So we totally acknowledge that this is an ongoing conversation, and when we see new incidents coming up, there could be also new privacy risks that popping up as well. And this is also really interesting. You brought up the regulation part of this conversation, right? So down the road, or at least in the long term goal, our hope is definitely try to in some way inform the policy making and all that, right? But we're not there yet. There's a lot of things that we definitely need to do, right? So I guess sort of like the narrative here that I do want to share is that AI indeed provide amazing technology opportunity, and this is sort of like the narrative that most of the folks are doing. But there's also a really important part in terms of what the privacy risks associated with it that we also have to consider. Specifically, that we're arguing or like try to highlight a bit more is we try to foreground the discussion about this AI utility and privacy trade-off, right? When people only talked about people talked about the utility of AI is not a problem. The problem become when they only talked about utility, but not select the privacy trade-off that behind those utility that they aim to build, right? So one of the key things that we really want to push forward in this sort of like this line of work is that we really try to broaden the design space for privacy preserving AI, right? Um, like if you think about the common notion in terms of privacy preserving AI, the only two things pop up, as I mentioned, differential privacy or federated learning. But it's definitely only so based on the taxonomy work that we did, it probably only covered a really small portion of the risk that AI could exacerbate it. So they could cover some part of the privacy risk that AI exacerbated in terms of processing data, but it does not at all consider the dissemination risk, I should say, or collection risk that AI newly created, processing risk that AI newly created. Give you an example here. Let's say I want to build a differentially private algorithm that predict whether a user is a criminal or not based on their image. We could for sure that build a system in, let's say, a federated machine learning architecture, but it doesn't remove the privacy risk that is like fundamentally attached with this risk, with the system, right? So this is something we're arguing, right? So whether we how can we actually help practitioner to think more broadly in terms of what does it mean by privacy preserving AI? And we definitely need a suite of work that in some ways support a practitioner to make that decision in a way that, building privacy preserving AI is not only an engineering problem, it's not only a technical problem, it's also a design problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. Then designing is the key part of the discussion. Then the processing of the personal information, especially, that's been very challenging in the AI field. But we need more conversation about this topic. So then because your research is very helpful to take many references from the privacy expert as well. So finally, I'd like to ask about the message for listeners because you do a lot of the great research so far, then you have any ideas and future research. So could you share about the message for listeners?
Yeah, totally. So I guess one thing I do want to highlight here is that the message here is definitely not, AI is bad for privacy, so stop developing AI. This is definitely not the message that we want to put out there. Instead, I'm still really optimistic in terms of the future events as AI. As I mentioned, I think AI actually give a lot of interesting and amazing AI technology opportunity that we actually could be realized that we couldn't do before, right? But what is really important here, I think, is we really need to start this conversation in terms of how AI privacy actually play a role here, right? And I think it's actually a really good timing that it's already a bad reckoning for AI, but I think it's not too late to start to think about privacy. And at least that we could start to foreground this type of discussion and start to not only talk about the utility of AI, but also talk about the privacy risk of AI, right? So I feel like as a community, we need more research to really understand how, from a practitioner perspective, how they consider privacy decision making and how we could actually help them and support them in doing this type of work in their day-to-day life. And, as a starting point, I really encourage, again, the audience to check our AI privacy taxonomy website as a starting point and try to get a sense of like, what are the direction that we're heading toward. But, obviously, there are definitely more work to do as a community.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Again, I totally appreciate it then joining it today. Then your existence is very great to deliver the privacy AI space. So thank you for Mr. Hank to join this interview.
All right. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.